Thank you, Chris. We move to the next part of our program where we have some of our folks from New Mexico speaking about various evils that we had talked about earlier. So I'd like to introduce first James Jiminez, who is the Executive Director of New Mexico Voices of Children, and he'll be speaking about materialism and poverty.
Wow, that's hard to follow. Thank you, Chris, for your insights and your passion for social justice. What I'm going to talk about is many of the implications of what Chris had talked about in the way that corporations have sought to take over New Mexico in ways that have really led to some of the conditions that we're seeing today. For those of you that don't know, New Mexico Voices for Children was founded 31 years ago this spring by 3 pediatricians here in Albuquerque, Stan Stark, Bob Greenberg, and our dear friend Nordy Kalishman, who formed this organization because they believed that while they, as doctors, could treat the medical conditions that they were seeing in their young patients, they knew that many of these conditions were really what we now call socially determined. They needed to look upstream for what was causing the conditions that they were seeing. And they're the kinds of things that Chris talked about. So they formed our organization, New Mexico Voices for Children, to be that voice. Now, it's kind of amazing that we've been around for 31 years. We've seen a lot of nonprofits come and go, but what it tells me is that this voice is needed. And we know it's needed because of the way that the research and analysis that we do shows that children in New Mexico, as compared with children in other states, are not doing as well. Most of the work that we do is focused on our state legislature. Some of what we do is working at the local level. For example, for the past year or so, we've been involved in helping to negotiate a paid sick leave law here in Albuquerque. And more the work that we do is, in the last, of course, year and a half almost, has been focused on federal issues, because we know the challenges that are happening to our social safety net here. We have had, before I go on, there's a couple people I need to recognize in the audience. I've only been the executive director for about a year and a half, and there were some really other incredible people that have been doing the work before me that helped build this organization to what it is today. Among them, a founding director, Ona Porter, who runs a fantastic organization called Prosperity Works, who works on poverty issues. But one of the other people has been the executive director sitting in the audience today, our dear friend, Senator Jerry Ortiz-Pino. Jerry, thank you for being here. Jerry has been one of those true champions for social justice in New Mexico, and has taken his service to a whole different level with his service in the state legislature. So we know that children in New Mexico are not doing well. We do the Kids Count Report every year as a grantee of the Annie Casey Foundation. Annie Casey Foundation looks at 16 different measures of child well-being and ranks all 50 states. Anyone know what rank we are? I know Jerry knows. Yeah, we're 49th. We're 49th. And we have been for quite some time. Some would say that we're 49th because we're a poor state. I don't buy that. You know, as my friend Susan Herrera has said, that while we may be poor in money, we're strong in spirit. And I think that the choices that we've made to cause us to be 49th in child well-being really reflect those really difficult choices of the kind that Chris talked about, that we are not making choices based upon what we know is best for children. So what I'm going to give you today is an opportunity to think about some tax policy issues. Hey, tax policy. That's the fun stuff, right? Well, to me, tax policy is where the rubber hits the road. Tax policy choices cause us to be in the situation where we are today. The first one that you'll see, and I'm going to go through a list of these things, and these are the kinds of choices that we can make to change the way that our children are doing in New Mexico, to ensure that those children have the resources that they need by the time they get to kindergarten, that they are ready to learn and they can be successful, and that they have well-funded schools, that we respect our teachers and pay them a decent wage, and that they can go on to achieve whatever their capacities allow them to achieve, not based upon arbitrary limits that we've set on them. So one of the first would be these corporate income tax cuts. It's exactly what Chris was talking about. That is exactly what happened. In 2013, at the end of the legislative session, some would say it actually occurred after noon on that day, but be that as it may, there was a bill that was rushed through with the support of the Democrats and Republicans and Governor Martinez to slash corporate income taxes under this really naive belief that we can tax cut our way to prosperity. How's that worked out for us? It hasn't. It hasn't at all. What it has meant is that we have slashed spending for public schools. We have cut our higher education system more than any other state in the union. Most of our school-based health centers have closed. Public health workers can't be hired because the organization, the Department of Health, doesn't have the money to hire them. We've seen what's happened to our Children, Youth, and Families Department and not being able to fund the workers that they need. A lot of it has to do with these kinds of choices. If we were to repeal that corporate income tax cut, that's $100 million a year. That won't solve all of our problems. That goes a long way towards providing the resources that we need in order to invest in our children. Next slide. Another one is, Chris talked about, again, the corporatization of our democracy and who reaps the benefits of tax policy. Special deal for manufacturers because we believe, again, that we can tax cut our way to prosperity. I spent a number of years doing economic development work as a city manager in Rio Rancho, and I worked in various state government administrations over time. And one of the things that I learned was that it really doesn't matter what the tax cuts or what the tax level is. If you don't have the workforce that businesses want, they're not going to come. So we, as a state, would be much better off investing in the workforce and investing in our children and our education systems in order to entice development here. Personal income taxes. We slashed personal income taxes for the most wealthy in our state. Why? Again, under the mistaken belief that if you cut the taxes for the people that are most well off, they'll sprinkle a little bit of what they saved back into New Mexico and we'll get jobs. It was done by a Democratic governor. That's right. Well, one of the things that Voices for Children I like to say is we're equal opportunity critics. And so when Democrats are not doing well by children, we're going to criticize them. And when Republicans are not doing well by children, we're going to criticize them, or independents, it doesn't matter. This was another very bad tax policy choice. Combined with the corporate income tax cut, you can see that a full repeal of that would be over $500 million a year. Imagine the good that we can do to fund early childhood education with this $500 million and another $100 million from the corporate income tax cuts. Investing in what we know is long-term development, and that's investing in people. Next one. This is a really busy slide, but this is really maybe among the most important slides up here. And you really just need to look at the big blue bar on the far left-hand side and the small bar on the right-hand side. What this shows you is that our tax structure is designed to benefit the most well-off. The people that make the least, on a percentage basis, pay much, much more of their salaries than do the most well-off. As a matter of fact, more than twice as much. Next one. Land grant permanent fund is one of my favorite topics to talk about, right? For investing in early childhood education. Next one. There are some of these other tax policy items up there. I'm just about out of time, but what I would like to leave you with is this notion that, just as Chris said, there has been a corporatization of our tax policy, and it's meant that our children are ranked 49th in child well-being. It means that we are disinvesting in our public schools and in our healthcare system, and all of the things that we know make a difference for children in New Mexico. You can go to our website at www.nmvoices.org to learn more about our work. And on June 25th, we'll have our 6th annual Kids Count Conference, and we invite all of you to come. Thank you very much.
So, of course, this is being replicated throughout the country. An assault, and this is what Karl Marx wrote about in the final stage of capitalism, that finally entities devour the very institutions that made democratic capitalism possible. And you're watching that. In the education, we spend, what, $600 billion a year on education, and the hedge funds want it, and Betsy DeVos is trying to make sure they get it. I guess the question I have is, I mean, you've highlighted an extremely important, because it's not just that they are diminishing the resources of the state, and of course the federal tax cut was instrumental in doing this, but then they expand these massive deficits, which they use as an excuse to destroy what's left of social services, including systems like education. That tax cut in the previous slide was passed by Richardson, who was an Obama appointee, a Democratic governor. What is the mechanism of pressure that we can use to make sure that this is reversed?
Well, I think it's forums like this. It's organizing. New Mexico Voices for Children has to work in coalition and collaboration with lots of other organizations, and we do that. I think it's organizing group by group, sometimes person by person, to make sure that they understand that the fact that our unemployment rate has been the highest in the country for almost a decade now as a result of the choices that we've made. And we're beginning to see more and more people become active in the public policy space that never have been before. And I think Trump has a lot to do with that, but the last 8 years, or almost 8 years of Susana Martinez have also, and before that, even during some of the Richardson years, have caused people to really question and to become much more engaged.
Yeah, I mean, education is fundamental, but I'm thinking kind of more in terms of tactics. I mean, we saw in Virginia, Oklahoma, teachers in defiance of their unions. And I mean, I don't know New Mexico the way you know New Mexico, but I think I've come to the belief that those are the only mechanisms left, that if we want to save our education system, it means New Mexican teachers have to strike.
Well, so we have something called the New Mexico Fairness Project, which is a coalition of about 35 organizations that are AFSCME, the Public Employees Union, it's the teachers' unions, the two teachers' unions in the state, it's faith-based leaders, it is nonprofit organizations, it's all organized around this tax policy. We have a revenue campaign that we are undertaking. You'll hear more about that on our children's agenda that we can talk about in the learning room over here afterwards, but that's the kind of organization I'm talking about, where wide range of interested organizations are coming together to form the backbone of the campaign that we are undertaking.
I mean, the question for me is, both in the state legislatures and the federal legislative bodies, it's corporate lobbyists with money. You can be damn sure Intel's got lobbyists at work here.
Yep.
And we live in a system of legalized bribery.
Yep.
How do you walk into an elected official who is a creation of that system and get them to pass an equitable tax program?
Well, the first thing that New Mexico is a little bit different than many other states, and because we are so small, the people that serve on our legislature come out of our communities, and one of the ways that we can make sure that they reflect our values is to get to know the candidates early and often and develop deep relationships with them before they get to Santa Fe, not after. Oftentimes that's too late. And so we're a 501c3, so we don't do endorsements, but we do lawmaker education and let them know what we expect them to do to invest in children and the kinds of votes that they take.
Open primaries. The guillotine.
I mean, I'll just close by saying that I think the traditional forms of pressure, including voting, has very little effect. I just think there's evidence, some overwhelming evidence, and that we have to become far, far more militant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speakers for ecological degradation are Kent Salazar with ECHO, which is the Hispanics enjoying camping, hunting, and outdoors, and Christine Lowry with MACE, the Multicultural Alliance for Safe Environment.
Hi. I'm here to talk to something that's a passion for me. It's conservation and seeing what's been going on to our state. We're termed the land of enchantment, but in reality we've become the land of extraction, of exploitation. We need to put a stop to it. New Mexico has a long history of using its natural resources, oftentimes without the forethought of long-term implications for the common good of the people, the land, the air, the biological life, which I love so much, and the future generations, our children. We now stand in a place where we suffer from the effects of extractivism of our uranium, hard rock mining, oil and gas, methane pollution, factory farms, coal, uranium mining, the legacy of nuclear waste, fuel chain, and water transfers. The long history of extractivism has exacerbated the effects of climate change, which is another thing that's impacting us terribly with drought and changing of weather and loss of water. I guess a change in human nature, the way we deal with nature and as humans. Martin Luther King called it thingism, and Pope Francis called it the throwaway culture that we have developed. But it has resulted in a depletion and pollution of our water, contamination of our land and air, the denial of our culture. I think you saw that the Valles Caldera up there, and people have been hearing about Chaco and fracking. These are denying of our cultural rights, our sacred places, and these things have to stop. All this is based on financial profits, which are all leaving New Mexico. These extractive industries, while they purport to give us lots of jobs, are not doing that. The profits from the extraction of our natural resources are leaving New Mexico. I'm not going to have time to address all the issues today that I have just named, but I'd like to focus on two today that Christine and I will work on, and that's oil and gas pollution and the uranium legacy. In New Mexico, we face the legacy of cleanup areas and Superfund sites. Here in Albuquerque, we have, I think, 7 cleanup sites, including uranium mining and nuclear waste chains. This history is sprinkled throughout New Mexico, but one area where the uranium legacy Begg's cleanup is the Grant and Gallup uranium belt and the places where the Navajo Nation, Laguna, and Acoma Pueblos reside and are suffering long-term health effects. And I'm going to invite Christina up to, Lowry up to talk about that right now.
Thank you. Jack Pile Pewati Mine, 1953 to 1982. It's true, uranium mining leaves a trail of destruction. Dust in the lungs laying in wait for the body to succumb. Uranium in the earth, quiet for centuries, now awake. Living water unable to filter contaminants for decades. Carved and slaughtered mesas with open scars from dynamite and tireless earthquaking machinery. Pueblo homes of local sandstone, sealed yearly with fresh mud and straw, unable to outlive the daily blasting required to ravage the earth. Foundations and walls weakened despite the work to patch and repair. There is no reclamation. There is nothing to pass down. Blasting dust unfolds on venison drying on fences and summer fruits drying in the sun. It becomes easier to buy bologna and white bread to feed the Pueblo miners and their children. One poison follows another, ingested and absorbed. Where once the cornfields were green and healthy, the fields lie fallow, fertilized with unknown substances blowing in the afterblasts. The mine pays well for one generation. New TV sets and pickup truck trophies abound. Can you see the change in what we value now? And there is a price that all children must pay. Their mothers, too, are needed to serve in the patriotic fervor of weapons development. The women drive the hauling trucks, they staff the offices, and they breathe the same air. Sometimes they join the men in the business of drinking and smoking and fighting, and the children are left alone. How well do they eat without the squash, chili, melons, and the corn? And how are their spirits fed? If the ceremonies are tied to seasons, and the words in the songs tell stories of hunting and the shape and the hues of abundance in the fields, what happens when the shifts change at the Jack Pile mine and the paychecks means going to town? If the morning prayers for the world and the people and the animals and the plants in the world are forgotten, what does this mean for the future of the Pueblo? Did this moneyed path forecast how the casinos came to be? Stay tuned for further destruction.
I wanted to talk to you now about oil and gas and methane production in New Mexico. And as you see up here, that, or you did see anyway, the northwest portion of our state is the San Juan Basin, and the southeast portion is the Permian Basin. And a lot of, I think we're number 3 in natural gas production in the United States, and oil too. But these industries have left a legacy of pollution that's ongoing. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. We passed a regulation this last, couple years ago, that the methane waste rule. And this went all the way through to Congress and passed. Okay, under the Obama administration, in the last days, we passed this regulation. We're losing $150 million in natural gas through flaring and waste by the natural gas industry. $150 million. That's our natural resources that's going away. This rule was passed for legitimate reasons. They have refused to enact this law. We have stood up and we have filed suit against their failure to enact and won 3 times. So the courts have seen that this needs to be done. It's the law, and we need to move forward with it. We're facing another suit again. They have not stopped. So I hope that we all will stand up for what's right for New Mexico. They have used, for the ecological degradation of New Mexico, they have been justified by producing myths. These myths include that industries provide jobs to this state, which is rural and poor. We depend upon the royalties of the oil and gas industry to fund our education and our children's way into the future. and we have been given these resources for natural use. This is not true. While extractive industries provide jobs, they're not jobs that lead our children into the future. And often they only benefit the companies who are headquartered out of state and whose banking is out of state and who take advantage of our lax, and we heard, cuts in corporate taxes and environmental rules and smaller royalties than in our neighboring states. The number of jobs by oil and gas industry is seldom shown alongside other types of employment such as tourism, fishing, camping, hunting, and just ecotourism. We have been given many resources to use in our land, and we overlook the traditional, sustainable economy that New Mexico has thrived on for years, like small farming, ranching, traditional arts and crafts, food, cuisine, this type of thing. Positive ways to move forward with these things are why we may feel daunted that we have unique gifts in New Mexico. We are the land of enchantment. We have beautiful, pristine, natural resources, clean air, good water. We have beautiful cultures here, cultures that have lived here long times. We have, before even the Spanish came here, we had the Native Americans and we had the Spanish. We have blacks that have lived here historically. We have all living in harmony here. It's been a wonderful place. This culture of New Mexico is why I think that I love to call this home. It is the land of enchantment. So we need to work on using those things. We have a state that possesses the ability to use renewable energy. We should be #1 in renewable energies such as solar and wind. Yet we lag. We lag other states that have less for us. The technical and scientific expertise of our state is one of the biggest things in the nation. The Albuquerque Journal said we have as many as 2,500 to 8,500 jobs to be created that have not been through economic development. So these are things that we need to address, and we need to talk to our leaders and move forward with this. What can you do to bring about all this change? I think we heard from Chris and different people talking about you need to get to know your legislators. We have several bills that are going on now that will be presenting in the back. We'll have petitions and different things. You can support educational funds for Native Americans and youth in uranium areas. You can help create state policies that serve best practices that protect our air, water, land. And you can help us develop a renewable portfolio standard. Thank you.
So a chapter from the book that I read from is on Appalachia. And if some of you may have been there, it's a horrifying dystopian vision of what these oil and gas companies, in this case coal companies, will do when they're not constrained. At this point, southern West Virginia is destroyed. Its soil is poisoned, its water is poisoned, its air is poisoned. Billion-gallon impoundment ponds with heavy metals and toxins. And Joe and I flew over it, and you kind of have to be in the air to understand the extent to which one of the most beautiful parts of the United States has been utterly destroyed, and now destroyed for generations. As you pointed out, the human cost to this is extensive. Cancer is an epidemic, as it is for those who live around the old uranium mines. And these corporations pillage, loot, exploit, and then walk away. As you correctly pointed out, they're out of state. And hearing your talk, I think it's instructive to go look at a place like Appalachia and begin to grasp that they won't stop. there was some amazing activists who fought as hard as they could, but it's the power of that money to buy off the press, to buy off the elected officials, to buy off the judges, which they were doing. And these are the same industries now that have targeted New Mexico. So I guess the question is, I certainly think that running through bills and appealing is important, and yet is that enough pressure? Don't we begin to have to carry out acts where we are impeding physically their ability to carry out this kind of work?
Okay. One thing that hasn't been mentioned is the power of prayer. And there are 1 million people all over the world praying for the health and the welfare of all the peoples in the world. But we never really acknowledge them as one source of power or as an asset. And I think that, you know, just to remind you what the power of prayer can do, there's a reason why we can go 50 days with no precipitation. That's becoming the norm. You know, there's a reason for those hard winds that we've just endured and that we expect again tomorrow. Please be reminded, nature is very powerful. Our prayers are very powerful. And whatever it is that you believe in, you know, reach for that power and pray consistently, because this is what we really, really need now. That's additional force that we're not thinking about.
Well, I want to quote the great Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who, when he was admonished by other rabbis for marching on the Sabbath in Selma with Martin Luther King, said, "I pray with my feet."
I just wanted to respond also saying that I think there is a place you can go to their offices and you can stand up and ask them those embarrassing questions. You can put them on a spot. You can stand up in front of people and don't be afraid to ask them the hard questions. These people are working for you. Stand up there and show everybody what they're doing. Let them know. Embarrass them if you need to, but these things have to happen.
The other thing is to run for political office. I am running for the Cibola County Commission. We're $10 million in debt, and something needs to be done.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Our next speakers are for Racism and Human Rights with Talia Boyd, who is the Western New Mexico Project Director for Conservation Voters New Mexico Education Fund, and Dr. Harold Bailey, PhD, President of the Albuquerque NAACP.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Talia Boyd. Torij Eatney and Shlin, Toy Glini Bushes Chin, Zanas Lena Deshache, Do, Toahana Deshanella, Tonhas Diza Nasha. I'm a Diné woman. I'm originally from Arizona. My clans are Bitterwater, born for two rivers coming together. My Chays are Many Mules, and my Nullies are Edgewater. This is for my relatives in the room and for my ancestors. Thank you, everybody, for providing space today and for being here. I want to share a story, my own personal story of one of my earliest memories of racism that I experienced. I grew up on the res, born and raised in a little place called Talia, which is about 27 miles from Tuba City, Arizona, near Grand Canyon, Flagstaff, Page, Arizona. When I was a kid, we had Mormon elders that used to come around our neighborhood and come to our house and try to spread their word. One day, we were friends with them. They used to come and play volleyball with the family. You know, we were really good friends with them. But I remember one day they came in and we sat down and we were talking. And one of the elders said to me, and I was probably about 7 or 8 at the time, but he looked at me and he said that, because I was asking, you know, we were talking about race and we were talking about this color of our skin. And he told me that the reason my skin was brown is because I was bad in heaven. And that it was as a form of punishment, I was born brown here on earth to show everybody how bad I was in heaven. So that was my first experience of racism as a kid. And it really just threw me back. You know, I told my mom I was really upset, and of course she was upset too, and we stopped inviting them to come over to the house afterwards. Part of the reason I share this story instead of others is because it highlights just how institutionalized racism is in America. And it also highlights the ugly truth of how religion was used as one of many ways to sophisticate and permanently embed racism into American culture. Indigenous people, we experienced this firsthand, you know, with boarding school era, with the massive violence that occurred in these schools during that time. A lot of our kids were sexually abused and traumatized in these schools. And we were taken away from our homeland, and we were taken to these religious schools. So this is very much a part of the conversation that we need to have when we talk about racism in America. These are hard conversations that must be had in order to really understand how racism continues to play out in America every day. And to better understand the current racial crisis, we have to scrutinize the past. And we have to scrutinize the massive injustices that are the root causes of this deep-rooted issue. We must expand our vision and our responsibility to what civil rights means. We must include the battle against racial violence in our understanding for civil rights. What if we place freedom from racial violence at the crux of what it means to be free and equal in the United States? Some of the current problems that I see is that we tend to associate danger and race. This is why we have a lot of aggressive policing, mass incarceration. We focus all of our attention on police and tend to overlook our own complicity in creating an environment in which people of color are not treated as equal. This goes into voter rights, workers' rights, wage theft, early childhood education. There's also the problem of silence, us not speaking up and having these hard conversations. The problem of apathy, this institutionalized racism that is very much embedded all across in all of our different movements. And of course, internalized oppression. There's some solutions, of course, that comes with this. Organizing, grassroots organizing, community organizing, mass demonstrations, mass actions, No DAPL, Black Lives Matters, those are good examples of these movements. You know, education is not a cure-all for America's sins, and that's a quote from this brilliant young African-American woman. And yet, education is still how most Americans understand their responsibility to fixing contemporary racial injustices. So education isn't enough. You know, we have to take action, and we have to have these hard conversations. You know, voting is also a way of doing this, becoming acclimated with our political landscape on a federal, state, and local level. For Indigenous people, this is hard. You know, we don't want to participate in a system that has oppressed us from the very beginning. This is why we don't have a whole lot of Native voters. But that's a part of my job too, is educating my people on the importance of that. And you know, we can be militant, but when you're when you're a person of color, you know, it's not easy to be militant. It's easy to say that, sure, but you know, we get killed. We get shot when we're militant. So, you know, that's one thing. There's a lot of truth-telling that needs to happen. And of course, we need to reconnect with all of our cultural identities. You know, for me, and I work on environmental justice issues, which very much ties into environmental racism. I work on uranium legacy issues in northwestern New Mexico. And we've had sacred sites desecrated for far too long. Mount Taylor is an example of one of our sacred mountains for Navajo, but it's a sacred mountain for many tribal communities in both Arizona and New Mexico. And our sacred sites are being desecrated almost on a daily basis. This has a direct impact on the psyche and the well-being of not just indigenous people, but all people of this land. This land is our land. We understand the sacred sites and the power and the energy that can be utilized to heal us. So with that, you know, we really need to understand the importance of protecting our sacred sites, protecting Mother Earth, and how very much integrated social justice, economic justice, and environmental justice is in this movement. And we do have a current campaign right now. It's with the Mount Taylor mine. Right now, the New Mexico Mining and Milling Division has currently put this zombie mine, excuse me, back into active status. And so in standby status, mine operators are not required to engage in full reclamation of a mine site. And neither does an active mine. So their 20-year pass is almost up, and they're trying to manipulate the Mining Act to avoid cleanup. And so that's what we called a zombie mine. But it's neither producing uranium nor cleaning up, so it's just an ongoing pollution. But this is a way that this Rio Grande Resources uranium company is trying to avoid cleanup as well as any kind of accountability. So we do have some petitions in the back. It's from the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment and also Amigos Bravos. So please take some time and go sign our petition when you have a chance. And I'm going to pass the mic. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Harold Bailey, president of the Albuquerque NAACP. I appreciate this time that you've given me. I have 3 or 4 minutes, so I want to just kind of put it down real quick. I want to kind of clarify a few misconceptions about the NAACP. It's not a black organization. We represent everybody. When the NAACP was founded in 1909, there were white people at the table. You know, being a black man here in New Mexico and America, you know, I would still be on the plantation if it was not for white people. So my point is that if we're going to fight racism, white people have to be a part of the equation. Okay. So when we're talking about racist, let me try to give you a definition of a racist. Racist is a person who feels that he has a God-given right to rule others. He feels or she feels that that particular race is superior to all other races, and that's when we have conflicts. See, so if you don't think that way, I'm not talking about you. So one of the things that, you know, I've done is being president of the Albuquerque NAACP. I go to the prison sometimes and speak, and there are a lot of brilliant people who are locked up, a lot of nice people. Probably some family members, you know, people here are locked up. So what I'm saying, they just had some bad breaks, and most 85% of them are going to get out. So we're going to have to plan to accommodate these individuals. They're called returning citizens, not just ex-offenders anymore. So what I'm saying is that it's very important that we form partnerships and coalitions. We need to work together. We're not going to, all the things that we talked about today, we're not going to solve anything if we stay in separate silos. So what I'm saying, we have to come together. Another thing when I'm talking about racism, you know, now you can see by my gray hair, I'm not a youngster. But I still get calls about young kids on the playground being called the N-word. Now, I thought we resolved this like 20, 30, 40 years ago. So we still have problems that we have to resolve. And just like Dr. Martin Luther King says, you know, we have to come together. If we want equality, respect, and justice, we have to do it together. So thank you very much. I didn't want to take up too much time, but I wanted to let you know exactly how I feel about diversity. We need to embrace it. Don't fight against it. And together, we advance. Thank you.
So one of the areas we've seen corporate intrusion to extract profit as the prison system in a big way. And it's not, the problem is not necessarily private prisons, which are awful, primarily used for undocumented people, but it's in state prisons that have farmed out all of their services to corporations. Global Tel-Link, the phone service that gouges prisoners and their families, R-Mart, which feeds them unedible food. Commissaries are privatized. Money transfer, which is called J-Pay, is all privatized. All of these extract tremendous fees. Prisons are providing less and less. The prison I teach in New Jersey, well, all of the New Jersey prisons don't provide footwear. The incarcerated have to buy $45 Reebok sneakers. They only make $28 a month. And with the extraction, it's now become $1 billion industry. You have, again, the prison industrial complex has flooded legislatures with lobbyists to make sure that there's a high recidivism rate. It's 76%. As you both of you well know, the court system is utterly dysfunctional. 90% of the people are forced to plea out. They stack you with, the students I teach, with the longest sentences are the ones who actually had a jury trial, usually the ones who didn't commit the crime to which they were charged, and then all of the charges that have been put against them, none of them are removed in a plea deal. As Michelle Alexander has said, if we walked into the prison system and everybody demanded a jury trial, the system would crash. And I guess I want to ask both of you, because prison is increasingly a form of social control, we have 25% of the world's prison population, again, mostly poor people, mostly of color, the highest number, or the highest percentage of people coming into the prison are now women. I'm curious your thoughts into the forms of pressure we can begin to exert on a system. And I think you had a slide on solitary confinement. Was it on?
Well, that is the issue.
Yeah, but solitary confinement in New Mexico being one of the highest in the country?
Correct.
Yeah. So, what? Fourth. So what are your thoughts on?
Well, let me clarify one more thing, is that, you know, here in New Mexico, we represent 3% of the population. The juvenile justice system is made up of black juveniles, maybe like 5%. And in the adult prison system, we make up 9%. So something's wrong with those figures. So what I'm saying is that Black Lives Matter. All lives matter, but Black Lives Matter. You know, they're shooting us like it seems like every other weekend, and by certain called officials. And I support two of the most important jobs on the planet: law enforcement, military people. So I respect those two entities. But I'm just saying we have to come together to change the attitude of politicians, judges, and individuals in general. So with those alarming numbers, we really have to just come together and just change those figures. And I'm sure there's alarming statistics associated with Native Americans and Hispanics. But being a black man here in New Mexico, when we represent 3%, we make up 9% of adult prisons, something's wrong with that.
Yeah, and I can just echo a lot of that. And I'm not really too familiar with the incarceration rates here in New Mexico, but I do know that one of the ways that we have been trying to tackle this within our own communities is bringing back traditional ceremony back to our people, trying to incorporate that into the healing process, but also really, again, educating decision makers and working on policy that will really help to protect our folks who are being massively incarcerated, who don't deserve to be there. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
Let me just talk briefly before I close about the prisoner movement across the country. is generated Alabama. It's called the Free Alabama Movement. And these are prisoners who have, I think correctly, come to the conclusion that the only way to break the system of neo-slavery, in their words, is to stop being a slave. And that means work stoppages within the prisons. And there have been a few, 10 days in Alabama shut down 4 prisons, cost the state millions of dollars. The leaders of that, the Free Alabama Movement, all 3 of them are indefinite solitary confinement. Alabama being Alabama, where you literally are not paid. It is slavery. Those people work 40 hours a week or more, and they are paid nothing. But Alabama being Alabama, you can get anything you want in Alabama prison, so they all have contraband cell phones, so we communicate. But I think one of the frustrations that they have had, and that those of us who care about prison reform have had, is there hasn't been a response on the outside to their work stoppages. The Pelican Bay, California had one a couple years ago. But I think that is what has to be done. They think that is what has to be done. And as they say, they need the infrastructure on the outside. One of the things they argue is don't go to the state capitol. That's not where we are. When we start a work stoppage, go to the parking lot of the prison. But I think that once again, we have seen the devolution of American democracy, the predatory nature of corporate capitalism, which is utterly exposed within the prison system. 1 million of our prisoners work for for-profit corporations, and you have prisons now going to companies, and these are Victoria's Secret, McDonald's makes its uniforms in prisons, and they're saying you don't need to go to Bangladesh and pay someone 32 cents an hour. You can come to our prison and pay them 22 cents an hour, which is about what they make. And they can't strike, they can't complain, and if there's a labor problem, off they go to solitary confinement. So I can't stress enough that I think that this is the civil rights issue of our time, and that we have to listen to the incarcerated. It's their job. They tell us what to do. Well, believe me, I teach. The political sophistication, I think as you mentioned, in this prison is, I've taught at Princeton, and the level of political sophistication in my prison classroom is greater than Princeton. I say that at Princeton, they don't believe me, but it's true. So I just want to encourage those who care about mass incarceration. You can't take on every issue. You have to decide what issue it is you're going to fight for. But it's an important one. And I think that we have to begin to support this enslaved forces that out of deindustrialized pockets have been put in these institutions as a form of social control, and of course they are primarily poor people of color. Thank you.
So if we can go back, I want Chris to know, first of all, I want to remind you that in 2009, New Mexico repealed the death penalty. Yes, yes, yes. And we've been fighting for the reinstatement of the death penalty every single session. So this is a battle. This is it, folks. We're never done. You know, we're always sort of, okay. In 2017, we passed a bill that would restrict the use of solitary confinement. And I'd like to brag and say that this got started when Interfaith Worker Justice New Mexico introduced a memorial calling for a comprehensive study of the use of solitary confinement in all corrections institutes. And that got everything rolling. So in 2017, the ACLU, big part of this, Lutheran Advocacy Ministry, a bunch of us, we finally got a bill passed, bipartisan support, and it was vetoed by the current governor, who is now term limited and will be leaving office at the end of this year. So we'll be back. But again, you need to be in contact with your legislators and reminding them that as constituents, solitary confinement is on your list. Jesus, can you go on? So Medicaid expansion, we give Governor Martinez credit for accepting Medicaid expansion. and also throwing up every roadblock in the way of it functioning really effectively that she could. But it is so important. Half of the people in this state are on Medicare and Medicaid. So, and the other thing is, healthcare is the greatest economic engine in this state. So it's not a drain on our economy, it feeds our economy. Dental health crisis. This is huge, and this is something that most people don't know about, and I could not leave without talking about the Dental Therapist Project, which is just teetering on getting passed and put into place. It addresses the issue of our dental care desert in the state of New Mexico. I have a colleague or a woman in Santa Fe who's waiting for a kidney transplant, and she told me that you can't even get on the waiting list unless you have perfect teeth. If you have any dental health issues, you can't get a lot of surgeries. So if you're someone who is in desperate need of certain medical care and you have unresolved dental care issues, you're stuck. And if you don't have any way to take care of them, you're basically just sort of escorted out of the waiting room. So please remember that tooth decay can kill you. It's not simply a cosmetic issue. And the other thing that I've learned working on this with Health Action, which is really spearheading this, with Dennis Roche, Republican Dennis Roche, and Senator Benny Shendo are wonderful, wonderful sponsors of this bill. And one of the things I learned is that cavities are contagious. The bacteria that causes cavities can be passed on from person to person. If a child, the parent has cavities, they use the same cup, or they share a spoon, or even kissing each other. So cavities are, who knew that? Cavities are contagious. Keep going. So this is this brilliant, brilliant project that was initiated by the indigenous people in Alaska. They have essentially wiped out tooth decay among their people, and now we are seeking to implement that and duplicate it in the state of New Mexico. And we're learning from Minnesota. Minnesota is one of the states that's done a really good job at this. We learn from our indigenous relatives and friends and communities. Payday lending, can't leave without this. I will tell you, there are people who have said that when they entered the legislature, the roundhouse, when we began to drop bills calling for a 36% cap on interest rates, that building was swarmed by the lobbyists. It was a nightmare. Everyone in that building, just about, except for Senator Ortiz-Pino, I'm sure, had been bought by the payday lending. When the big banks began to realize what the profit potential was with payday lending, they swooped in and put all the mom and pop businesses they're out of business. Those stores are gone. It's all big bank. 80% of all the profits leaves the state. We're working on it. And two communities that I just wanted to highlight. Believe it or not, Gallup has 44 payday lending or title loan stores in the Gallup. Clovis, 23. There are more payday or title loan stores in New Mexico than there are fast food restaurants. Jesus? Early childhood education, do I need to say any more? Go to the next bill. So this is very, very important. I wanted to make sure to get Alan Sanchez up there. He's the executive director of the New Mexico Conference of Catholic Bishops. I was standing next to him at a candlelight rally when he made the comment that part of the reason we don't have preschool education in New Mexico is because of systemic racism. He has been taking heat ever since that happened. People have been calling him every name in the book. And he is exactly right, and I want to just affirm him and thank him for having the courage to make that statement in spite of the backlash that he's got. And I think that's it. And so now we're ready to move on to the next. Thank you for just tolerating my little interjection. Here, Joan. I'll put it back. Yeah. So thank you. Oops. I turned that one off.
Maybe that one went dead. So I just want to thank all of our speakers for being with us today, and we have our last two speakers here. And this is on militarism, and it's Myrriah Gomez, who's a professor at UNM, and Tina Cordova, founder of Tularosa Downwinders.
Thank you all for your patience and attention today and for being here. New Mexico is a nuclear colony, militarized by the Los Alamos National Laboratory in the Rio Arriba to the Trinity Site fallout zone of the Rio Bajo, by the transuranic waste facility in the Llano Estacao in the east, to the abandoned uranium mines of Dene, Laguna Pueblo, and Acoma Pueblo communities in the west. And the heart of this militarized nuclear beast is located right here in Albuquerque at the U.S. Air Force Nuclear Weapons Center, headquartered at Kirtland Air Force Base. We are a nuclear settler colony affected by the new colonialism of the military-industrial complex. Per the February 2018 Department of Defense Nuclear Posture Review, the current mission of our country revolves around the development and maintenance of nuclear weapons. So it should come as no surprise that, as the only state with a cradle-to-grave nuclear industry, a March 2018 report lists New Mexico as the state most dependent on the federal government. New Mexico is inflicted by militarism, an ideology of glorifying military power and creating a culture of fear. This modern-day militarism did not occur overnight, and it did not begin in 1945. It began when the Spanish colonizers ravished indigenous communities, beginning on July 11, 1598, when Juan de Oñate arrived in Yunque Yungue, Okeowinge. By 1800, the Spanish government controlled a vast amount of North America, including all of present-day New Mexico. By the end of the U.S.-Mexico War in 1845, Mexico ceded over half of its territory to the United States. The U.S. Senate altered Article 9 of the treaty, which as originally drafted assured that New Mexico and all of the ceded territories would be admitted as states as quickly as possible. Instead, it took 64 years for New Mexico to become a state. Why? Because people in the eastern part of the United States believed then and now that New Mexico was incapable of self-governing because people like the first appointed U.S. Attorney to New Mexico, William Watts Hart Davis, wrote that Pueblo Indians were a primitive race, and Mexicans lacked the stability of character and soundness of intellect that gives such vast superiority to the Anglo-Saxon race, end quote. He targeted women by saying that the standard of female chastity is deplorably low in New Mexico. The twice colonized New Mexico, once by Spanish military and a second time by U.S. military, preceded the nuclear colonization of New Mexico by the U.S. government beginning in 1942. The ways that race and racism ushered in nuclear colonialism were not much different than the earlier Spanish and U.S. colonial periods that led to our current militarized conditions. What started atop the Pajarito Plateau in 1942 when Hispano farmers were removed from their ranches, some at gunpoint, has evolved into a fully militarized nuclear-motivated state. What started at Site Y of the secret Manhattan Project evolved into the smallest county of New Mexico, Los Alamos. Fast forward to 2008, when New Mexico's economy went stagnant during the recession. The federal funding that New Mexico receives clearly does not correspond to the economic situation in which New Mexicans currently find ourselves. New Mexico has become a brain drain in which many of the best and brightest homegrown New Mexicans leave the state to find employment, which contributes to the shrinking middle class and the growing poor and working poor populations. Multiple studies demonstrate that private business generates up to $1 for every dollar spent, while military-related government spending creates less than 50 cents for every dollar spent. Lano claims that for every dollar of taxpayer money spent, New Mexico receives $1.35, but this is likely an overestimation. Approximately 1,773 of Lano's employees live in the Rio Arriba County, yet those employees are paid over 4 times less than the Lano employees who live in Los Alamos. In 2017, the median income in Los Alamos was $535,000, whereas the median household income in the state of New Mexico was $45,674. In 2016, New Mexico had the highest unemployment rate in the country, the 3rd highest poverty rate, the 3rd lowest per capita income, the 5th lowest percent of adults 25 and older with high school diplomas, and the highest percentage of children living in poverty. Just last week, it was announced that New Mexico has the highest high school dropout rate of any state in the country. We are rated 50th for science education. How, pray tell me, that a state with 2 national scientific laboratories is 50th in the country for science education? Why do we rank 49th in the nation for internet access? Recently, a neighbor of mine from the Poaque Valley in northern New Mexico told the Santa Fe Reporter, quote, "I live 14 miles from where they invented the freaking atomic bomb and I can't get internet access." Ironically, Los Alamos County's privileged lifestyle is paid for by a huge threat to humankind as a whole, nuclear weapons. Select individuals benefit from Department of Energy and Department of Defense spending at the expense of the rest of the state, in which people of color are fighting for reparations and cleanup of militarized sites that were exploited and left in ruin. If nuclear weapons spending could help the state's economy, it already would have. The federal government continues to use a racist ideology to maintain the nuclear industry in New Mexico, while the state economy and its people suffer. We must promote and advance the efforts to demilitarize New Mexico by removing the nuclear industry. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tina Cordova, and I'm the co-founder of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. We're a grassroots organization that was founded more than 13 years ago to bring attention to the negative health effects suffered by the people who lived in the communities adjacent to the Trinity test site in south central New Mexico. The New Mexico downwinders are the collateral damage that resulted from the development and testing of the first atomic bomb. We are the people, mostly indigenous people of color, who had our land stolen to establish the Manhattan Project and Los Alamos Labs and the Trinity test site. We are the people who lived as close as 8 miles to the test site. We are the people who lived in the shadow of the national labs, oftentimes made to work there without consent. We are the uranium miners who were sent into the pit to bring out the yellow cake that would be utilized to build the bomb. We are the unknowing, unwilling, uncompensated, innocent victims of the first atomic bomb who were enlisted into the service of our country without consent or knowledge. People have been dying ever since, and we've buried far too many of our loved ones. We have no elders left in our communities. They've all since died. As a result, we have a cycle of poverty associated with the cost of taking care of our health once we get sick from the radiation exposure and we live in rural New Mexico. We can never get treatment at home because there are no medical facilities in these small towns. It places us in a position of undue stress, both emotionally and financially. People tell me stories, and I've heard hundreds of them, about how they hold bake sales to buy pain medications, or how they have to sell cattle so that they can get their chemotherapy. How a woman goes door to door in her Pueblo community to raise money to buy gas so she can drive her husband to and from Albuquerque several times a week for his treatments. The militarization of New Mexico that took place with the testing and development of the bomb has had far-reaching negative consequences, the depths of which we may never fully know or understand. When a family has to spend all that they have to obtain medical care that they need to survive cancer, they can never develop assets, they only develop debt. The US government has been very, very good at hiding the truth about what really took place here. They categorized the area around the Trinity site as remote and uninhabited, but we know, based on the census data, that there were 40,000 people living in a 50-mile radius, and that is neither remote nor uninhabited. In 1945, people lived very organic lifestyles in rural New Mexico. We had no running water. We used cisterns, acequias, running ditches, holding ponds to collect water for drinking, cooking, bathing, cleaning, doing laundry. We depended on the earth, the soil, the water to produce all the food that we ate. We had gardens and orchards. We raised cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, goats, and the like for food. And we hunted wild game when it was necessary. Imagine a radioactive cloud that rises over 7 miles, exceeding the atmosphere into the stratosphere, with 10 pounds of unfissioned plutonium that has a half-life of 24,000 years. Imagine an ash settling out on everything, on the soil, in the water, in the air, on the plants, and on the skin of every living thing, both human and animal. It was an environmental disaster of grand proportions, and the total destruction of a way of life for everyone who lived in New Mexico at the time. No one knew what had just happened. Most people alive at the time thought that it was the end of the world. And while it was not the end of the world, it was the beginning of the end for so many people. People like my own father, who was a 4-year-old child living in Tularosa, about 40 miles away the crow flies from the test site. He was one of those who lived a simple but full life in rural New Mexico and who paid the ultimate price for simply being a child raised in a downwind community. My father died 5 years ago at the age of 71 after suffering with 3 different cancers for more than 8 years. Cancers that he didn't have risk factors for. Oh, but yes, he did. Exposure to high levels of radiation damages cells, which leads to cancer and changes in your DNA. And now I have the genetics, and I too am a cancer patient, but one that has survived so far. And through our exposure, we have passed on the damaged DNA to our children and our children's children from one generation to another, never to be the same. The TBDC does the work that we do because downwinders in other parts of the country, specifically the downwinders of the Nevada test site, have been compensated and taken care of by the US government for 28 years now. They've received more than $2.2 billion in claims. But what we covet most is that health care card that they receive that entitles them to the very best health care any place without co-payments or limitations or any type of suffering. It's hard for me to accept that somehow our government considers their suffering to be greater than ours or of more consequence, that somehow they count for more than we do. And we've already discussed today, 43% of people in New Mexico access health care through the Medicaid system. And we know, because we've held focus groups and town hall meetings and collected over 1,200 health surveys in 2 counties, that a lot of people who are downwinders access health care through the Medicaid system. It's high time that we hold our government accountable for the injustice that was done to the innocent people of New Mexico. It's high time for the atonement that we've been denied for 73 years. There is a moral and an ethical imperative to right this wrong, and the time is now. We've been invited twice in 2017 to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and twice they've postponed those hearings because apparently our problem is not important enough. We need your help. We have a website. It's www.trinitydownwinders.com. We expect that before the end of the summer we'll be invited again to testify. And I ask all of you, if you would like more information about our work, to go to our website. Thank you very much.
So you touched on something that's not extremely important for New Mexico, but just important for the United States. Reminds me of Karl Liebknecht's great quote about militarism after World War I in Germany, that the enemy is within. And Seymour Melman, who was a professor at Columbia economist, wrote 2 great books on the destructive force of the military socially and economically. And we have seen this rise of the expansion of empire beyond the capacity to sustain it, but also the rise of a celebration of military culture without an acknowledgement, which you both so eloquently portrayed, of the reality of military culture. And there's a few of us in the room who have seen the American military at work, know what war is. It's nothing like the myth. But this is a nationwide problem. You can hardly express criticism of the military, and it's not just the military, but it's, of course, the military-industrial complex, which after World War II, that corporate forces of the military combined to perpetuate the production of military products within the economy. They didn't industrialize military production as they did after World War I. So you're certainly both acutely aware of, I would argue, the U.S. military is the most dangerous force in American society, and yet it is, at this point, venerated, almost sacralized. How are we going to confront? There's been no audit of the military for 10 years. They're even beyond audits. How are we going to confront this institution? How are we going to dismantle this institution? They're smarter than I am.
Well, I can say this much. I can say that there are consequences because I'm the living history. My family, the people around me are the living history of the consequences. And I know that we continue to tell the story that we tell to remind people that there are consequences. And while there are many of you in this room who may not identify as downwinders, and you may not understand why this issue is of importance to you, I say that the reason all of us should be important, the reason it should be important to all of us in New Mexico is because every year, and Jerry Ortiz-Upino can speak to this, every year our state legislature is trying to figure out how to balance that budget. And every year they're trying to figure out how to fund Medicaid. It's this huge albatross. And thank God for Medicaid, or else people, I guess, would be dying in the streets. And what I say is that a certain percentage of those people who are on Medicaid in this state are taken care of by the federal government other places. And we should recognize that when we have to take away from our children's education to take care of people that should be taken care of by the federal government, there's a problem. And that's why it's important for everybody in New Mexico. We get locked into this cycle of poverty that we can't exit out of, because when we take away from education, which is the single thing that equalizes poverty, then we sort of place ourselves back into that cycle. And so our government, I mean, we should, I have been told that the reason we don't have funding, or the reason that they have not passed the amendments to incorporate us into the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act is because of money. But when we spend trillions and trillions of dollars and then we talk about modernizing our nuclear arsenal, there is money for this. There's just not the desire to take care of it.
Talk about corporations. Right now, Holtec has a proposal to open a permanent high-level radioactive waste facility in the state of New Mexico, in southern New Mexico. Lon, you're standing, stay standing. Noel, stand up. Leona, stand up. Christine, stand up. Joni, stand up. I don't know who else is in here. Please come talk to these people. Come talk to me. Find out what you can do. We're in open comment period right now. Y'all want to end this? It starts now. Write those comments, send them in. There's a cask outside. Go get more information. We got to be part of this democratic process. We got to stop it from coming back into our state. This is just setting a precedent. When we talk about cradle to grave nuclear industry, we do have, people will say, well, we don't have, reactors. We don't have commercial reactors. Every time you pay your P&M bill, some of that money every month goes to Palo Verde. So we are paying into that. So we need to stop that. We need to put an end to it now.
Thanks.
Take a deep breath. So the reason we had this event, when we were negotiating the contract with Chris Hedges' agent, he asked a question about, is this a fundraiser for somebody, or what are you going to do? And my response, snarky response, was, this is not a Lenzic Theater lecture night for deep-pocket progressives in Santa Fe, who then will go home and tell everybody, I heard Chris Hedges. No, this is a working event. We are equipping you, we are arming you to go out and get engaged, hopefully with the Poor People's Campaign or in other ways, because we're taking to the streets, just as Chris said. This is not something that we can only do in the voting booth. It's something that we need to begin to do as people are moving towards primaries and the fall elections. We are arming you to be able to bird dog, which is to approach candidates and politicians in public settings, put them on the spot, get them to go on the public record, yay or nay, on a very specific issue. And we're looking at issues that are already in play in New Mexico, which is why I mentioned some of those. Predatory lending, dental therapist projects, the Haltech. There are things that we can get engaged with right now in advance in a very effective way by today committing to the next steps. So before we let you all go, I want to introduce the members. Susan Gordon, come on up here, and Stephen Pica. Susan Gordon is the director of the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. She's also the past national director of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, which is when I got to know her when I was making trips to Washington for coalitions working on those issues. Steve Pica is with Ghost Ranch and Conference Center, and Sister Joan is the director of the New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light. Come on over here. So I want you to please give them a round of applause, because they... And to our outstanding speakers today, I'm so excited about getting them up in front of you. And after this event, then, we're going to close with some more singing, because we're going to sing our way into the revolution, and then we invite you to be about whatever you want to do on this Sunday afternoon, but we want you to do it by way of the book signing and the tabling in the community room, which is to the left and down the hall.
So again, thank you all for coming. And in that community room, it's important to go there because there are actions you can do. Right now, we are trying to keep, for instance, the BLM rules to address methane, increase renewable portfolio standard in the state, a number of the issues that Holly mentioned, and some things around the uranium mining and others as well. So please make your way this way and around and over, and you will see that, and you can also meet with Chris Hedges as well.
To add on to the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act that Tina Cordova was speaking about, we have postcards. This time we're targeting Senator Crapo from Idaho. So come in to see me at the table in there, sign a postcard, I'll mail it for you. And I have flyers about the Mount Taylor hearing, which is happening May 7th in Santa Fe at 9 o'clock, and we need everyone to be there to say why they should not open a new uranium mine at Mount Taylor.
Gratitude for the ceremony that began this space and time to Marion, for the stories that have been shared. For we, a people of the land of enchantment, we have to ground ourselves in our ceremonies, in our stories. Know your story, know other people's stories, and may we share those together.
And finally, I want to thank our wonderful hosts. I want to thank the congregation and the staff. Jesus, you've done an outstanding job with very little guidance on a nice Sunday afternoon. And Scott Sharp, senior pastor of Central United Methodist Church. Have I forgotten anything? And Chris, thank you so much. So we send you out with song. Oh, let me just say one thing. One of the ways that you can support RECA, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, is by writing a check to fund the travel from New Mexico to Congress whenever the Senate Judiciary Committee in Congress finally hears Tina Cordova's testimony with others about the Trinity and the Tularosa and Downwinders. So support them. We're trying to raise about $8,000 to get a group of people to go and be present in that place. And also sign up for the Poor People's Campaign. Chris said it's going to take more than votes. This is action, and we are in place to get going on that when it kicks off on Mother's Day. Thank you, everybody, for being here.